When people think of classical music, there are usually a few things that come to mind. Maybe it's a big fancy concert hall with everybody dressed in tuxedos and looking very old and serious. Maybe it's a soprano screaming out a very high note in a language that doesn't exist anymore, and every wine glass in a 40-mile radius shatters at the same time. Maybe it's two orchestras sitting across from each other playing Beethoven's Fifth and Mozart 40 at the same time on an infinite loop until somebody dies. Or maybe you don't think of anything at all, but you just know that when classical music starts playing, the battle to steal back the aux cord from your grandmother begins, and your battle with insomnia comes to a merciful halt. Now, I'm a fan and performer of classical music, and I believe these stereotypes to be mostly untrue. But for many people, these things are exactly what comes to mind. And my question is, why? Why does classical music have a reputation for being so boring? What can we do going forward? And is there any hope for keeping what I consider to be some of the greatest music ever alive? I think the first thing I'd like everyone to know is that if you don't like classical music, it's not your fault. It's not because you're not smart enough or not cultured enough or anything like that. In fact, a lot of the time, it's the performer's fault. If you for some reason accidentally wander into a recital hall and decide to stay and listen, you might find yourself dozing off when a performer shuffles out on stage, plops themselves behind a piano, and starts hammering out some tune that you might have heard in an old movie once. And as a performer, I'll tell you, that's on us. It's our job to take the notes that are written on a page, the knowledge we have about the composer and its history, and our performance abilities, and turn it into something that's exciting. And I don't mean everyone glancing at each other to see if this is supposed to be good exciting. I mean genuinely exciting and interesting and moving. For the performer, this might mean giving a little speech about why anyone should care or what the music is about, offering additional aids like subtitles or images to go with the music. There are many levels to appreciate this kind of music on, and we need to make it available for everyone. Otherwise, concert halls will have to have a medical team on standby to resuscitate those who are sitting in row 36F. The second reason I think classical music has gotten a bad rap has nothing to do with what music is being played or how it's being interpreted, but rather I think it has more to do with the setting in which most people have the opportunity to listen to it. Relegating all this cool music to the depths of old ornate concert halls and auditoriums, some of which have a dress code, strict rules and decorum about when you can leave and enter the venue, or even when you're allowed to applaud, this is a disaster for the effort to keep the public interested. Many people think these rules are in place to show the proper respect and keep with tradition, but it was entirely common in, say, Schubert or Debussy's heyday for them to perform at salons and bars, and for audiences to applaud at will. Everyone had a few drinks, listened to music, half of them were hopped up on this or that drug of choice. It was like a 19th century Coachella, but instead of rich people in racist headdresses, everyone is dressed in identical four-piece wool suits. Pick your poison, I guess. Final point I'd like to touch on is surrounding competition. The musical landscape that we live in today is entirely different than when classical music was being first written and performed. Obviously back then there was no such thing as classical music, it was just music. But today, the media is filled with the likes of Harry Styles, Rihanna, and Tame Impala. From an audience turnout perspective, this is some pretty stiff competition. And to compete with the likes of these artists at all, classical music is gonna have to pull out all the stops. Jazz musicians have their heads around the solutions to these ideas much better than classical musicians do. Partially due to the origins of jazz living in underground clubs and it being generally a younger form of music. Also due in part to the size of their ensembles. Aside from big band jazz, most ensembles are trios and quartets. Logistically, this is a much easier operation to manage in terms of putting on a live concert. I mean, imagine if there was a place like the Blue Note, or really any jazz club, but that specialized in chamber music and string quartets. People could come have a drink, chat, listen or not. They could clap when they heard something they liked, all without the stuffy decorum that classical music is usually associated with. Now don't get me wrong, the massive choirs and orchestral institutions that are still in operation have a time and place. All my criticism aside, those large-scale concerts are really a sight to behold, and I encourage everyone to attend a performance if they get the chance. Now, the other day I came across a passage in a book titled Rough Ideas. It's by acclaimed pianist and author Stephen Hough. He was writing about the efforts to bring classical music to a wider audience, and his take on it was interesting. Quote, "The problem is not really with access. In Britain, our auditoriums, orchestras, and festivals put on concerts for every conceivable audience group at every time of the day, sometimes in the most unlikely venues, streamed on multiple digital platforms. The sheer accessibility of music today is mind-boggling. But in the end, some people will just not respond to this art form we love, and that's just fine. I do agree with him on some level. There are a lot of people and institutions that have already put changes like this in place. And at the end of the day, some people will never choose Bach over Beyonce, which is totally okay. Some days I feel that way too. But I don't think we've exhausted all our options yet, and I don't think that we've gone nearly far enough. To end the conversation on, well, it is what it is, it just feels a little weak to me. But I think it's not all that controversial to say that classical music is at a little bit of a crossroads. Will we hold tightly onto our convictions of stature and gravitas, some of which made us fall in love with classical music in the first place? Or will we adapt and change in order to bring the joy and enlightening experience of this music to as many people as possible in a place they feel comfortable and in a way that's new and inspiring? We'll have to see. Thanks so much for watching. If you guys like these kind of videos, hit subscribe and like and comment and all this stuff, and I'll keep making content like this. Thanks.